Not long ago, I was hired to author a movie to premiere in front of an audience of 400 to 450 people. The first thing I noticed when I loaded this project on my system was the audio was turn down your volume if you care about your hearing. An absolute mess. It was hot, distorted, very noisy, just generally wimpy sounding. And the only thing I can conclude is that the person who mixed the audio didn't know about standard practices for dialogue. And in fact, they probably use modern pop music as their reference for audio levels, which doesn't really work. There are conventions for mixing CDs and the like, but they've kind of been thrown out the window a long time ago. Now, it's a different matter for movies and video production, and let me backtrack a little bit to the late 1970s, where there already were several digital audio tape recorders on the market, and everyone had their own different calibration levels, but they were all based around real-world professional mixing workflows. So, for instance, if you're mixing on your analog console, which you would be at the time, you generally keep the VU meter around 0. You can go above that or below that, but nominal is 0. And if you were mixing to a Sony deck, the 0 on your analog console would equal minus 14 dB on the digital meter, giving you 14 dB of headroom before you run into distortion. And another manufacturer was minus 15 dB, one was minus 18, minus 20, and don't quote me on this, but I think one of them was minus 24 dB. It didn't really matter because as long as you're hovering around 0 on your analog console, you'll get a good clean signal to the digital tape recorder, and when you play it back, it'll come back at the same level. Now, copying from one deck to another digitally might run you into some trouble as far as the calibration goes, but I'm not going to get into that. Now, at the same time, George Lucas noticed that Star Wars sounded and looked drastically different from one theater to the next, and he put together a team of people to do a series of experiments and surveys to figure out what would become the THX standards, which are really designed to give an equally enjoyable experience to all the movie theater goers. And there's a lot of regulations involved in THX. It's not just about the sound system, but one thing that they did standardize was audio levels. And what they determined was 0 on the analog console would be equal to minus 20 dB FS RMS average on the digital deck, and played back through the movie theater system, that will be 85 dB SPL to the audience. And that's extremely loud. That's really just a calibration point. Dialogue is to sit around 74 dB, and that's louder than a normal person-to-person conversation would be, but you also have a much larger room, so things tend to not sound as loud, strange as that seems to be. And plus you have extraneous sources of noise around you, like HVAC, other people whispering about whatever in front of you. And so 74 dB kind of overcomes that without being too loud, and what it gives you is just ample amounts of headroom. You don't need to do a lot of processing to the voice. You can just have nice, natural, clean dialogue. Now, when you calculate that in the digital domain, that's minus 31 dB RMS. And you might say, minus 31 dB for dialogue, that sounds really low. But it's not. They're the ones that set the standards. If you mix above that, you're mixing too hot. So now there's some exceptions to that, like fast forward to the DVD era, they moved the dialogue level up to minus 27 dB RMS. And the reason for that is people are not going to want to listen to dialogue as loud in their living room as in a big theater, because it's a smaller room, it's a more intimate setting. And so they reduce the dynamic range. It lets you turn down your theater a little bit, and you can still have nice, clean dialogue. You still have great dynamic range, like big musical swells, beautiful explosions, you name it. But you're not as likely to disturb your neighbors or hurt your hearing in that environment. And now we can extend that to broadcast. The standard dialogue level, it's changed recently. It was minus 23 dB. So again, that dynamic range has been compressed a little bit further. And now they go by loudness units. It's a different way of accounting for voice levels. And the software solutions that are available now for modern broadcast metering is actually quite good. I'll put a link in the description to get more information on that. But the beautiful thing that they did with these modern systems is they put 0 as the nominal level instead of at the very top of the digital scale. So if you're mixing your dialogue and you're hovering around 0, you're in good shape. And don't feel like you have to go beyond that, especially for broadcast television. Now, Of course, for DVD and Blu-ray, it's still minus 27 as far as I know, but there's a lot of people that don't follow these standards. And especially for projection, if you're preparing something that's going to be projected, it's very important that you stay within those levels, or else you're just going to blow away everybody in the theater, and it's just going to sound awful no matter what you do. Now, getting back to this movie that I had to author, the only thing I could do, it was so heavily limited and compressed, is just bring down the average levels until it sat at the correct level, and it still sounded just as bad, but it would be at a normal level that wouldn't hurt people's ears. Anyway, let me digress one more time. When I first started working in broadcast television, my boss said that he was glad to have an audio guy, a dedicated audio guy on board, even though I wasn't working as a dedicated audio guy. But he said that so many of his other employees concentrated solely on the way things looked that audio just went the wayside. And the thing is, that was 20 years ago, and dialogue mixing is just as bad now as it was back then, and mostly it's because that people just aren't aware of the conventions. So anyway, I hope that was some food for thought. I hope it was helpful, and if you have any questions, of course, feel free to leave a comment. I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can, and of course, don't forget the thingy here. So thank you, and have yourself a nice day.